All right, here we go.
What's good, everybody? I'm Robert Dickens Jr.
This is Ryan Reed.
This is Elanders Frazier.
This is John Gaal, and you're listening to Volta.
Changing the conversation
For percussion educators,
Designers,
And performers.
All right, welcome everyone to another podcast episode, Volta Percussion, with our speakers of tonight, Ryan Reed, Elanders Frazier, Robert Dickens, and of course myself, Mr. John Gaal. Today's topic, mastery. What is it? How do you achieve it? Is it worth all the pain and heartache we go through as musicians? So, let's get started.
What do you
I'll
think
just
about
say my
mastery,
2 cents real
John?
quick. My 2 cents, mastery, either you can play it, whether it's perfect or not. That's my definition of mastery. What's everyone else's definition?
That seems almost too simplistic for the type of word it is when you talk about a master. Like I'm thinking about like a Jedi master, like a ninja master, like a karate master. We talk about mastery. Like I feel like it deserves more weight. You know what I mean? Like it deserves like a lot of weight to it.
Well, you can go get a degree.
Yeah, I mean, yes, you can, but do we attribute the same attributes, double word, do we attribute the same thing to a student that has reached a mastery level, let's say in grade school? Or are they incapable of reaching that mastery level until they get a master's degree?
I think it's better to say that mastery is progressive. Because, I mean, you can master something on the level that it's on, but that doesn't mean that you master every single thing there is to know about that, though.
I like that. And I would agree with that statement because I feel like you are in a situation of never ending, like a level of never achieving greatness if you can't master things at a lower level.
Agreed.
You know what I mean? Let me give you an analogy, and this just popped into my head, right? Like, what if somebody had mastered like putting down mulch? You making that face, John, but this is what I'm saying, right? Maybe it's not the most terribly difficult skill set, but when done well, does it not elevate the presence of somebody's yard or house?
Yeah.
It does, right? And wouldn't you rather have somebody on your team that has a mastery in mulch placement than somebody who doesn't? If that's what you need, like you run a lawn service, I need one person that is nails on placing mulch. You're my guy, you're my girl, you're my person that does this job because you do it very well. You pay careful attention to it. You have studied weight dynamics, you studied color dynamics, what it should look like, etc. And I know when I send you out to do a mulch job for somebody's house, it's going to be done nails every single time. But then from the outside, we look like, well, how hard is it to put down mulch, man? Like, well, when you're talking to a master, anything can be explained in terms of the level of difficulty that it took them to get to that point of mastery. So why is it, and this is where I circle it back, why is it that sometimes in the music world, we do feel that one-sided coin that says, you can't be a master yet, you haven't done it long enough?
How are we defining a master? Are we basing it on experience with time? Are we basing it on achievement?
I think it can be kind of both. I think it can be time. I think it can be achievement. I think it can be built and learned or learned skill.
But my question is this: are we saying that a person? I don't know. I'm wondering: are we saying that a person has mastered that musical instrument, or are we saying that students need to master certain skill sets? I feel like that mastering a certain skill set that leads to quote unquote wherever this, ethereal place of mastering the instrument is, I feel like that's more accessible to say, okay, this student has mastered scales. Like they 100% understand that on the highest level possible to the most basic level possible. But I think it's kind of confusing when you're saying mastering an instrument, because I would say that most people that really study any instrument would say it would take forever to fully master and know mastery in the sense of I know everything there is to know about this particular instrument.
I also feel like you kind of put yourself in a position where you feel that you have nothing else to gain about that instrument and or idea either when you've reached a certain level of mastery. You know what I mean? If you look at it that way, because it could be subjective, really. Think about it, right? Like some people may not see it that way. Some people may not see a mastery of an instrument as finite, more so than they think of it as an achievement level, meaning that once you've reached a certain mastery of that instrument, then you have the ability to express and share things that most common people might not know and or understand about that instrument. However, there are still things that you can gain as an individual while you're still on a path of greater achievement for that instrument. Proficiency, I'd say.
Ryan, what do you think? You've been quiet.
Well, I think there's a big difference between the word mastery and the word master. And I think that's kind of what we're getting at right now. Like a master is somebody who is like the top of that field. Okay? And I think a lot of times we think of a master as someone who knows everything, but as educators, we talk about lifelong learning. So those things almost contradict each other if you take them in the strictest form of like a master is somebody who should know everything. But if we talk about lifelong learning, we're always students. Okay. But I throw that word out. If we're talking about mastery, I think that's a very sliding scale thing, because you can master something before you're ever or you can have mastery of a skill before you're a master of anything. Like for a fifth grader or a beginning percussionist to come in and have mastery over a legato stroke, just down up, is like they can have that mastered at the same level that a doctoral student does. Like the stick starts up, it goes down, and it comes right back up. So I think talking about that, I think seeing mastery on a very sliding scale is a good way to approach it, because you're teaching kids early on. If you're teaching not only proficiency in skills but mastery in skills, you're teaching kids early on what it means to achieve at a very high level and like have control over something. And hopefully that you would see that progression of very early mastery of super basic skill sets progress into mastery of like really basic, like fundamental skills, to beginning level skills, to intermediate level skills, to advanced level skills. So I think it's super important to teach mastery at every level of a student's ability and students' learning progression, so that hopefully by the end, we talk about the lifelong learning where they're teaching themselves because they have mastery over those earlier skills that were taught to them by a teacher.
I like what you said about having that scale, those different levels, because like as that fifth grader has that mastery of a full stroke, right? But as they go into 6th, 7th, 8th grade, they start mastering that full stroke to different applications. They start learning the different terminology. Mm-hmm. They start learning the different physical elements behind it. So as they progress, that mastery of that full stroke expands. But then my question is there ever a level in which you have reached the pinnacle of that concept? And how do you know you've reached that pinnacle? Or, like we've always said as educators, it's always a learning process, yada, yada, yada. But is there ever such a place of, I have finally reached it? Like, I now know everything about all the physics, all the terminology, about all the different languages of that full stroke, full rebound, legato stroke, however you want to say it, depending on where you are in the United States.
I would say that will be something that you can define for yourself, but I think that the key word that I got from what Ron just said was the idea of control. In order to have mastery over something, that means that in any context that it's presented, any way that it's being presented, you have control over that concept. The same way that we would tell students to be artists and to perform and to emote, and what are you trying to communicate to the audience? You can't even begin to talk about those things if the students don't have mastery over the general physical science of producing good sounds. So in a sense, there should be some level of mastery over the sounds themselves and the mechanics of motion and how to create that sound, so that you can actually get to, okay, now I understand these concepts to such a degree that I can put them in any different context. You know what I mean? And at that point, like you're saying, it's really just, I need to learn the music or learn this particular context to, adjust it slightly, but it's not necessarily a situation where I wouldn't be able to do that because it's a new concept that I have not mastered. You know what I'm saying?
So it goes from more finite to maybe more abstract.
I would say so. I mean, the concepts themselves, everyone already knows what those concepts are. You know what I mean? But obviously applying full strokes to different rudiments would be, different than they would be depending on the tempo, depending on the rhythm, depending on, what happens before that and the music, what other dynamics are happening. Like, there's a lot of different contexts to put that in. But to say that a person has mastery over that particular stroke type would mean that that person is able to apply that stroke type with the same quality, no matter what the context. The quality does not dip, from one context to another.
I like that.
I think
a
that's
lot.
a more important way. Yeah, I think that's a more important way of thinking about it than necessarily saying I have reached the pinnacle of knowledge about this concept, because we've all been through, like, we've had mastery of by the time you get to experience that we have had. But, like, I'm still learning new ways to explain those concepts to students, especially as I'm encountering more different students. That doesn't mean that I don't have mastery over how to play a legato stroke or a full stroke. It means I can apply it, like Robert said, through every application and not have the quality of it change. But there's still things I need and can learn about it in terms of, like, how to convey that information and have it click to students. So, like, mastery is almost like your self-application, whereas I think it gets a little bit harder to apply mastery from a teacher level, only because, like, you're never going to have 100% knowledge of everything and never learn anything about it, Like, as we explain things differently to different kids, our level of knowledge or our level of ability to explain things grows. So I don't think you'll ever reach, like, full capacity, if that makes more sense. Like, I think your capacity to learn about something, even after you've mastered it, is still there. It's like the levels of a black belt. Just because you get to a black belt doesn't mean you know everything about karate. Like, there's multiple forms of karate you still have to learn about, even though you got a black belt.
I I think what you're referencing is something that you referenced earlier, Ryan, which was mastery versus being a master. And I almost think like we take mastery as the self-application of staying involved with things, and then becoming a master almost puts you in a situation of where now you understand how to re-communicate the information that you have mastered to others in varying degrees, you know, dependent upon the person that you're expressing that information to, whether you're just having a nighttime conversation amongst friends, or if you're explaining it in a giant clinic to hundreds of students, right? It may be different how you convey what you're discussing, but if you're a master, then the level at which you're able to convey that a lot of times, still slinging it back to Rob's point and Ryan's point, kind of connected, you have that control. You have that control to say, regardless of the situation that I'm in, I still now have the ability to express this concept to other individuals, right? And I'm almost thinking about like some of the best professors and teachers that I've ever had, to where like it was a combination of the material, but also of how they expressed the material as well. Because I feel like having the nuts and bolts is not enough to have true mastery. You have to have that secondary element of how much of it have you internalized and soaked in thought of those different concepts and ideas, to where now you can express it in a way that is unique and original from your perspective that people can lock on to, right? Because you can go get the nuts and bolts from anywhere, but what's the one thing that people want to say? I want to be taught by that person. I want to go learn from this individual. I want to be trained by this sensei, right? They can go pick up a book and learn how to do a jab, but if you're learning how to do a jab from Floyd Mayweather, it's a different experience, right? If you're learning how to do, a side kick from Bruce Lee, it's a different experience than going up and picking up a book, right? So you're almost, as a master in that context, right? Your personal like silhouette of the information is just as connected to your mastery and development than the actual level of knowledgeable material that you have at your disposal.
I think that goes back to the idea that mastery in and of itself is a progressive thing, which I think is important. Like you said, the information isn't changing. And I mean, especially what we're doing as music educators, the information itself isn't changing. Everybody's playing eights. Everybody's playing some double stops. Everybody's going to play some major and minor scales, going to play some modes, going to play some whole tone scales, going to play some chromatic scales. Like, everybody's doing a thing. You know what I mean? But it's like, as an instructor, how do you communicate that? You know what I mean? How are you communicating those things? And I feel like even though we talk to our students about mastery a lot, and that's something that's thrown around in the educational realm, I don't think that it's talked about enough from the instructor standpoint as well, that you can continue to master the way that you communicate the information. I was talking to a friend of mine earlier today about, sometimes when certain people see certain things in a score, they would be like, well, you can't ask kids in A class to play a fivelet. Like, that's not going to work. It's like, well, there's some people out there doing it. And the reason why they're doing it is because they're writing what they can teach. And it's because they've mastered how to communicate these things that for most people, it is very difficult for them to communicate how to consistently do that over time and not have anything change. It's like saying, well, kids in this class or kids that's only been on snare this long, you can't ask them to play a triplet roll and go down on a one knee. Well, there's a lot of people that's proven that wrong. And why is that? Because people are doing what they can teach. And I think that that's something that we can all take from this, and that I'm taking from this is I always need to be continuing to up my level of mastery of communicating the information, because I can always find a better way to explain eights. I can always find a better analogy to explain, cut time and common time and compound meter. I can always find a better way to do that. But if I come at it with that mentality of like, I already know it, and these are like the checkpoints that you have to go through, then my students get lazy the exact same way, because they feel like, okay, well, I've mastered this because we made finals or we did X, Y, and Z, or we're world class, so I've mastered X, Y, and Z. And then people go on autopilot, and then you start to, take a nosedive as a performer. So I think it's important for our students to understand as well that they see us getting better, they see us improving, that mastery is a journey. Yes, you can master concepts and you can master those checkpoints, but continually mastering, how you communicate that is a completely different thing. One of the other things that I'll say is I don't know if you guys have ever seen the video with Jacob Collier and Herbie Hancock, where he takes a music theory concept and he explains it on like 5 different levels. So he takes maybe something like harmony or chords or something like that, and he explains it like he was talking to an elementary school kid. And then he explains it as if he's talking to someone in middle school. And then he explains it as if he's talking to someone in high school, and then college, and then someone that has a master's level degree. To me, that's how we know that we've mastered something, or students have mastered something, is if they can break it down to its simplest form enough to teach it to others so that they can coach those students how to do that. And in my opinion, if a student is unable to communicate the information with clarity to others and to replicate it, then they have not mastered that concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, bravo point on that. That's heavy, man. Like I'm sitting here thinking about the level of times I've had students go and work with other students, and the level of confusion that has returned back to me when they come back from those groups. You send them off in little duets or little trios to go work on something, and they come back not really having much more progression than when you sent them away. And thinking back on those moments, I have to wonder, did I consider what they had mastered and could teach each other? You know what I mean? Like, what have they mastered and could communicate to each other in that situation or scenario that we were that I had them in. And as an educator, I think it's important to know where your student's mastery level is so that you can utilize those devices appropriately, right? Like if you are going to have students go work with other students, you have to know where that mastery level is so that you can communicate appropriately. Hey, I want you only to work on this with them because I know you have a strong understanding of this. I know where your mastery level is. This is as far as I want you to go. If you go any farther, you might be left out in the dark. So you just you just want to make sure that that they've got a clear expectation of what they know and currently have a mastery level of, if that makes sense. And I think as instructors, we can do that for our students because our levels should be far enough away from our students to where we can discuss with them, these are the skills and items that you are currently experiencing a mastery level at. And these are some of the things that you still have kind of like in a gray area that still needs to be worked out, right? And maybe these are the things that you should not be trying to communicate to your peers because you have not fully understood what this is yet. And I think I've seen that more often, more common than I could share when a student tries to share something with somebody else that they have not experienced a mastery level at, they just kind of think they do. And then you kind of walk up on them and you're like, oh, really? That ain't it. You know what I mean? Like, that ain't it. Good try, but that ain't it, you know? And I think, you know, that we always talk about awareness, and we talk about awareness on this podcast, like awareness of your surroundings. Like, do you have the, you know, all of the material ready in order to be able to dole out that assistance to others, or is there still more that you need to learn? And then from an awareness standpoint, where can you get that information? Like that's the next step. Is, can I get it from you? Do I need to get it from somebody else? Do I need to look farther outreach to try to get this information? Like, knowing that is invaluable information. More so for educators, because I think students kind of know they need to start with their instructor first and then go elsewhere. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just jump over the instructor and try to find it somewhere else when it was sitting right there at the house with them. But I think instructors need to have that invaluable knowledge more so than anybody, to know that if I'm not experiencing a mastery level in terms of being able to explain this concept to my students, I need to get some help. And don't be ashamed of asking for that help. Don't be ashamed of asking for individuals to come and assist with your level of evaluation, because you have not reached the level of mastery that allows you to teach what you're trying to accomplish, you know, with the expectation and result that you want to get back out of it. Kind of to what you said earlier, Rob, to where like you can only teach what you know. And then knowing like, okay, we bucked things up a little bit this year. I know about 89% of it. That other 11%, I got to call some folks and get them over here to help me get that other 11% focused out to these individuals, because I recognize now as an individual that my mastery level is not where it needs to be to teach 100% of this. Maybe 89%, but not 100%. Now, if 89 is what you want to settle for, okay. But most people don't want to settle for 89. They want to go all the way. So with that understanding, then you need to be comfortable with sharing some of that burden with somebody that might have a little bit more to give than what you have to offer.
You definitely need a mentor. I think once you get to a point where you're out of the like having an instructor all the time. I love that. Like, I love having a mentor or you know, kind of like what we are, where we just bounce ideas off of, rap about it with each other and that kind of stuff. But having somebody or a group of people that you can just rap and bounce ideas off of. But I also think it's important to know that, like, it's not just about knowledge that you have, but the application, like the physical application of that knowledge. Because earlier we were talking about control, and it, you know, you can know a bunch of stuff, but if you can't actually do it, you know, that's a big problem. And it like got me thinking as we were talking about it. Like, I read a book a while ago that talked about the 10,000 hour rule, and like, don't really have mastery over a skill or like a full understanding over a skill until you've done it for 10,000 hours. You know, and I think that's where a lot of times instructors and really students fall short of having mastery of something, And I don't think it's 10,000 hours hard fast, but let's take that number as an idea. If you only practice for 1 hour a day, you're 10,000 days away from having mastery. You know, if you practice 2 hours a day, you're 5,000 days away from having mastery. You know, which is, I'm no mathematician, but that's tens of years. You know, whereas you've got to have that application, and it's not a hard fast like you have to do it 10,000 hours, but your hours have to be focused enough that you're like, all right, I understand why the mechanics of my hands are doing this. Because sometimes it's not about the knowledge you can spew out of your mouth. Do you literally understand what your body is doing as you're trying to do this? To apply it every rep, every time, the same way. And that's where I think people fall the shortest, or fall away from having mastery of something, is they can talk about it. Like, we can watch YouTube and we can watch anybody we want to explain about it and soak in those words and take it all in by osmosis, and we read a bunch of books. But when it comes down to it, like, can your hands do it? Can you do it? If you can't do it, then forget all the knowledge you have. It's not valuable. You're only fooling the people that don't know as much as you and have even less experience and less ability than you do. You know, you're eventually going to walk into a room and be found. So, like,
called out
it's
from the
not
box.
just knowledge.
Out.
It's not just knowledge, it's application and like, and that's right now my students, like, I try to encourage them to help each other out, but at the same time, it's like, you guys aren't spending any time at home, so you want to help each other, you want to be leaders, but like, you're not doing the work to be a leader, to be closer to having a higher level of mastery than these kids are that you're trying to lead. It's just the blind leading the blind. They just happen to be more blind than you are.
Yep. And I think that everybody's probably had that situation at some point in time where you have what I would call de facto leadership, where it's like, hey, like, you know, kids ask, well, like, is there a bass line section leader? Is there a quad line section leader? And it's like, no, there isn't one. But if the quads have to do something, and I'm gonna allow this person to tap off, and kids know, I'll say that is what it is. That's just the reality. And sometimes you're in too young of a situation where no one has the information that's in that particular section, so you can't let them have sectionals on their own because no one has the information. That's just a reality. So again, if those students don't have it, then you have to give it to them. If you don't have it, you have to bring someone else that has the information. And that's what I think I start to think about when I'm thinking about percussion in general. The world of percussion is so vast. And what we are tasked with knowing is a lot bigger than one person. You know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely.
Students, you know, even when we're asking our students to be in control of, like, understand how to make good sounds on a triangle, güiro, tambourine, concert bass drum, marimba, xylophone, vibraphone, you know, concert snare drum, timpani, concert toms, all these things that are like, oh, it's all pretty much the same because you just hit things. And it's like, not really. All of them have little quirks and things that are just slightly different, that you have to have all this information in your head, you know, in addition to where does this instrument probably sound best within the ensemble? You know, do I need to play this tambourine up so that it actually, you know, cuts within, or do I need to keep it lower because it's super soft? Like, all these things, we're asking our students to know a lot, and we're asking ourselves to know a lot. But at the same time, you have to know when you are approaching that point to where you, like Elanders said before, you got the 89%, the group isn't going to get that other 11% if somebody else doesn't bring it in. if you don't have someone else that can come in and do that for you, that can readily demonstrate it. Because I think the other thing is there are a lot of things that we would say that we know how things are supposed to look, but at the same time, we may not know how to demonstrate them, and we may not know how to create multiple layers of examples that make it crystal clear as to how to do something. One of the things that I'm very, very privileged to have this year is a great front ensemble staff. My front ensemble looks so much better, not because there weren't people that were standing in front of them that had marched world class, right? But it was people that understand all the levels as to how to explain something on a very basic level, all the way to the most advanced level. So they're able to bring every single player up to a higher degree because they understand all those levels. So it's hard. I think it's almost unrealistic for us to think that we're going to master everything, specifically if you're a percussion director, that you're going to master every single thing and you're going to be the end all be all, have all the information, have all the knowledge. But it's okay to recognize that, yeah, there's some things that I've mastered, but there's some other people that they have more information than me in that area. And I think that's a smart thing to pass on to our students as well, to lean on their peers and create their own community for the things that maybe I know something about this, but I could still learn a little bit more because someone else is a little bit more of a specialist.
Yeah, specialists should be used more often than they are currently. Because I think people don't consider things specialized knowledge. They consider it as generalized knowledge, which is on the other side of the spectrum. And because they look at it as generalized knowledge, they feel that there is not more that needs to go into this level of education. I experience this a lot with school groups that I work with that have cymbal lines that don't seek out that specialist knowledge for cymbal wielding in a current marching world that exists. You know, they just, once again, this is my perfect example of they see something that is generalized, like, oh, I know how cymbals work. I can do this. I can make this happen. You know, and it's like, for what you're asking your kids to achieve, you need a specialist.
Yes.
But they see it as generalized, not as a specialty. And that's
an issue within educators in general, that I think that there are not enough of us that are giving enough respect to those of us that are specialists in given areas. I feel like there's almost kind of a disrespect sometimes in like, oh, well, I want to see this kid play a keyboard, or I want to see this kid do this or do that. And it's like, well, that's great. That kid is great at reading pitches, but they can't play in time. Sorry, that's a requirement to be a percussionist. So it really kind of doesn't matter unless you're going to put them on tuba or something where they have some long drones and just hold out whole notes forever and ever and ever. That kid still fails at percussion, just like the kid that's great at snare drum but can't read, treble clef.
right.
But I think that we have this hierarchy that I think contributes to that, because it's like, well, this skill is better than this skill. Well, it's like you need all of them. So you need all the educators as well. You need all the specialists as well.
Yeah. The world needs to respect specialists more for the specialties that they bring. And we should not look down upon those individuals that choose to use specialists when they understand where their own weaknesses are. Mm-hmm. At least they're smart enough to understand their own weaknesses and to do something about it. I much more respect that individual than the person that does understand their weaknesses and then makes an active choice not to do anything about it. That, for me, is disrespect to your students and disrespect to yourself as an educator, by just making bad decisions. So,
Yep.
you know.
Yeah, I do have another question though. When we're talking about mastery, I noticed that I don't want to make this about match grip in general. I don't want to do that. I am a snare drummer. Sorry. So I identify as such, even though I am a percussionist. On the inside, I'm a snare drummer, and I've always been a snare drummer, which is cool. What do you think about the idea of mastery and some sects of educators only teaching certain skills or certain approaches because they quote unquote translate to more instruments? Is that a part of mastery in a sense? Like, everybody using the exact same grip or approach to everything. Does that contribute or help mastery by simplifying everything and making, trying to create as little variation as possible?
Ryan, I really want to hear what you have to say on this before I respond to that.
I personally think that's more reading the room than it is about simplifying things. Like for me, first of all, I by no means am I a master of traditional grip. It's been years since I've played it. I mean, I can explain it, I can get kids to do it, but for me, I don't have that group of kids. None of mine are trying to do DCI. None of them have expressed that desire, and none of them have expressed that work ethic to do anything beyond the high school realm. For me, it's more reading the room than anything. If they want exposure to it, I'll mess around with it a little bit and I'll show it to them and whatnot, and that's what kind of lessons are for if they want that. But I take the approach of if you're not trying to use this elsewhere, whether it be beyond high school or another group or something else, then we don't have the time to explain it to everybody. I don't have the time to explain it to everybody, and if I ever got to a point where it's like, all right, I got a couple kids that are ready to take on that challenge, then I got to get my study on and playing more traditional grip, and I got to bring in somebody else to help my understanding of it, but also I got to facilitate extra time for those kids to help give them the time and knowledge. So for me, it's not necessarily taking away differences or simplifying anything. It's more reading the room of this is what I got. This serves, not that it serves no purpose for them to know it, but they're never going to use it. So
right.
Why teach it? For me, that's my approach to it.
Same question about Burton versus Stevens grip. Which one and why? And
traditional grip sucks. Match grip all the way. Woo!
John's coming back out.
Go back to your blackout, John.
I mean, which one would you teach and why? And would you consider it better for mastery of the percussion or of percussion in general as a keyboardist to know both grips or to teach both grips, or would you prefer one over the other?
I'm gonna jump in and say in terms of mastery. Go ahead, Ryan.
And yeah, this is in the context of the mastery conversation.
I think one grip. I think one grip. And this is why I think that. I learned Stevens grip through college and through all the marching I did. Everywhere I marched, played Stevens grip. Except for 1 year of DCA, I learned Burton grip. And it was explained to me like very dumbed down. Like, put this mallet this way, put this mallet over it, put your finger in between it, pick it up that way. And that's how I explain it. Now, that's how I explain like building the grip. Now, if you have an understanding of how to play one grip over the other, it's just holding the sticks differently. The sound doesn't change of the instrument. So in terms of mastery, that way, I would choose one grip and like master it before messing with a secondary grip. Because, the biggest argument people make for Burton grip is it's louder, you get more of your hand on top, you can hit it harder, yada yada yada. The keyboard doesn't know. The keyboard does. You can
I actually disagree with you on that, Ryan.
Bring it around downtown.
Oh,
go ahead, John.
Ryan, sorry, you were breaking up on my phone. I would disagree on you in the sense of people learn Burton grip so they can hit things harder. I would say it's a good stepping stone for young percussionists getting into the field of four mallets, because one rotation of Burton grip is already the match grip type of movement. Whereas now the student just has to add that next level of rotation rather than the knocking on the door analogy. Whereas if a student went straight from two mallets to four mallets, they have to learn the independent rotation, which is slightly a different, it's a different movement that kids aren't used to right off the bat. So some people would argue, go with Burton first, because playing, with mallet four or whatnot already has that knocking motion, just like match grip. So all the kid has to learn is the rotation. And after they learn that rotation, they get more comfortable if they want to move on to marimba, which is typically the higher level vocabulary in the marching arts community. They can then learn the other side of the rotation.
But is it?
Yeah, my only argument to that, John, is why put an extra step in there? If you're gonna suck at it for a second, and all beginners do, why suck at one grip to get good at one grip to then suck again at another grip?
Oh, I agree. I teach my students straight from two of those Stevens. But I think also we're getting into the nitty gritty of preferences, of like what Elanders said before. A student, they need to learn, they need to master the concepts, the foundations. And then if they want to go further in their education, they go study with this teacher for their approach or this teacher for that style.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Rob's just butthurt because match grip is the ultimate grip of all time, and he teaches traditional.
Those are tough words, John.
I have no qualms about some match grip because I make all my students play it all the time in class. They get plenty of match grip, more than enough match grip. I just don't want to see it on the floor. I don't want to see it on the field. Thank you.
This is my thing with different grips, and I hate that this is channeled into a grip conversation. Rob, thank you.
Wake it up a little bit, so I had to throw the whole Burton and Stevens thing in there just to see what was gonna happen.
Like, here's my thing, right? And Ryan kind of said it perfectly, right? Like, they're gonna suck at something real bad when they first start doing it either way. So I think the exposure needs to be there for every student. Like, they need to be exposed to as much as possible. And then let that student determine, depending upon how your program's set up, maybe they are going to gain some mastery at some things before they leave your tutelage. But at that point, that student needs to discover and hone in on what else do I personally want to have a mastery level knowledge of, and what am I willing to do to get that? Whether it's take additional private lessons, whether it's 10,000 hours on a practice floor in a practice room on a practice instrument, or whether it's reading books 1,000 hours a day, if it's not something that's a practical application that is mechanical, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe it's just music history and knowing as much about these types of composers and how this music form functionally works. You know, maybe it's listening to a lot of different styles of music, et cetera. I think that the exposure is always necessary. And I think as a teacher, I'm always going to try to expose my students to as much as possible, even in offside commentary, so that they understand there is so much more to this than just what I'm capable of giving you. And I want you to know that humbly, that I humbly come to you as an instructor that honestly says, I do not know everything that there is to know. And you need to know that I'm going to teach you as much as I can possibly squeeze into your head. And this is something I used to tell all my students on the first day of class, not with marching band, but our first day of like percussion class, is I'm going to try to squeeze as much information into your little brains as I can before the end of your 4 years here. But it's still not going to be as much as there exists in the world of percussion. You'll have so much more to learn. But I'm going to try to get as much in there as I possibly can. And sometimes that's intimidating for students because they're like, oh my goodness, what does this guy have to share? You know, but, you know, it's like we have so much to share. Think about all the experience and knowledge that we've taken in over a couple decades. And then we push that back out to our students in so many different ways. And then now they're able to form an opinion and say, I want to learn more about this. I want to learn more about this. I want to learn more about this. And I want to learn more about this. Then they can a la carte what they want to become mastery level at. And it's not just, well, you can only master this because Ryan says this is what you have to do. And that's it. There's nothing else that can be done. Like,
see, that's what I'm thinking too. On the flip side of that is like, oh, well, the masters use Stevens grip. So if you want to be a master, you got to use Stevens grip. Or, oh, the master snare drummers use like traditional. So if you can't play traditional, you're not a master. You have not mastered marching snare. It's like, I don't know. That's kind of the reason why I started to go that direction anyway, just because
whoever says that is an idiot.
I 100% agree, but there are idiots in this world.
Yeah.
But I mean, but for real, I think there's a lot of assumptions that are just made in general. I mean, I think everybody knows a snooty person on either side of the aisle that's like, oh, well, you don't really know this instrument if you don't know this grip on this instrument. But I think the key thing is you're mastering how to communicate on that instrument. Whatever technique you decide to use, it's completely up to you. If you sound great, you know, playing match grip on a concert or marching snare drum, it doesn't really matter. It sounds great, and you sound great doing it.
I want to hear it.
All that literally matters. But at the same time, you know, I've seen, you know, Dr. Tim Adams at UGA play concert snare drum using traditional grip on tilt. Sounded great. Mm-hmm. It was cool. So, I mean, I know I had some students in the past that would be like, well, why would you do that on a concert snare drum? And, you know, why would you play traditional grip on a concert snare drum? It's like, because he felt like it. And he has mastery over the technique and decided that that's the way that he wanted to play concert snare drum. So, I don't know. I think at the end of the day, some of mastery is being able to do whatever it is that you want to do because you have the control over how you play that instrument.
I think that's a great way to bring it back. Do you have control over the facility of the instrument and the sounds that you want to produce or the sounds that the music calls for? Mm-hmm. And if you do, then does it matter? I don't think it should.
I don't think it should either. And I also think that also shows a level of mastery as well, is being able to get a great sound using multiple ways that you can get it. You know what I mean? That does show a level of mastery too, is that I would assume that a master is someone that we consider not to be one-dimensional as a musician. They're able to put it in any context that they want, including grip, or including, you know, all these other things that are other variables that we can think of.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if we summarize, like, what does mastery actually mean? I think it's like user defined, you know, like, I think it's user defined of what mastery actually means, but to be a master of something, then you've got to be able to communicate that message in multiple ways. It can't be one, it's got to be multiple. Mm-hmm. So
I agree. I think that's a great definition.
So, well, hey guys, I think this has been a great conversation. I feel like, you know, we've kind of stripped down mastery to its bare bottom, and then we built it back up, like, through trial and tribulation over the course of this conversation. If you're listening or watching, John Gaal actually experienced a blackout. So you may see some moments in the broadcast or the YouTube version where his screen does black out. It's because he has experienced a blackout where he's currently at.
Help me! Help me!
When you first said that, though, it sounded like you were saying that John blacked out. I was gonna be like, wait. We might need to explain what he means.
So John did not black out, but he has experienced a blackout, meaning power outages where he's currently located. But he had still been able to chime in audibly through the conversation. So we appreciate that. As always, if you want to get some more information to us or maybe send some topic ideas, you can always send us an email at voltapercussion@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram under the handle at Volta Percussion. You can also find us on YouTube under that handle, Volta Percussion. So I'd like to say a real warm thank you to everybody out there that has been listening, that has been taking the information and running with it or sharing it. We really appreciate it. And I can't say it enough, you know, this concept and idea of 4 gentlemen coming together from different areas and just talking through some things together. And a lot of the times for the first time on camera, on audio, experiencing what we have to say and bouncing off of it is a beautiful thing, because you know, you get that realness that we're trying to deliver, which is how we're reacting in the moment. And, you know, we hope that you all continue to share this journey with us while we continue on. We've still got quite a slew of more episodes to deliver for you guys for season 2. So thank you again. I want to send a thanks out for myself. My name's Elanders Frazier. We've got Mr. Ryan Reed here, Mr. Robert Dickens Jr., and of course, our neighborhood power outage, Mr. John Gaal. Thank you guys once again, and we'll catch y'all on the next one.